I walked into the dining room, trying to steady my nerves, but the moment I stepped through the door, I felt the weight of every judgmental glance. The table was immaculate, perfectly set, the kind of place where appearances mattered more than people, and I knew tonight would be no exception. My boyfriend greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, and I forced one back, hoping it would be enough to dissolve the tension that hung thick in the air. His father, however, wasted no time, his gaze sharp and calculating. "So you're the one he's been spending time with," he said, his lips curling into a smirk. "Street garbage through and through." The words hit me like ice, freezing my chest and leaving a hollow ache behind my ribcage. I could feel the heat rising in my face as my hands clenched involuntarily beneath the table. I wanted to defend myself, to argue, to point out every small kindness I'd ever shown, but the words caught in my throat. I could see the slight curl of satisfaction in the corners of his mouth, the way he relished this moment, and I wanted desperately to vanish, to escape the sting of his disdain. My boyfriend's silence was deafening, his eyes darting away as though shielding himself from the tension, and it made my heart ache with disappointment. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe, to stay composed, and I could hear the faint hum of the chandelier above, each tick echoing in the pit of my stomach. Every polite bite I tried to eat felt like sand in my mouth, dry and unappetizing, reminding me that I was nothing but a spectacle for their amusement. The laughter of his siblings at some private joke underscored the isolation I felt, and I realized that no one was on my side here tonight. Anger bubbled just beneath the surface, sharp and urgent, but I forced it down, smoothing my expression into an agreeable mask. When the main course arrived, I barely touched it, my appetite crushed by humiliation. Finally, unable to endure another second of the oppressive scrutiny, I stood abruptly. Chairs scraped against the polished floor, drawing attention, but I ignored the stares, my back straight, chin lifted, and legs carrying me toward the exit. As I reached the door, I caught one last glance from his father, a mixture of shock and disdain, and I felt a rush of resolve. I left the house with my pride intact, my mind already spinning with plans, my pulse thrumming with a quiet fury. The night air hit my face like a balm, and I walked into it seething, composed, and determined, knowing this was far from over. I sat in my car long after leaving the house, the engine idling as if waiting for me to move, though I couldn't bear to. His father's words replayed over and over in my mind. Street garbage. Each repetition burned a little more, etching itself into my chest, leaving a hollow ache that no deep breath could chase away. I remembered all the subtle dismissals that had led up to this moment. The way his mother always smiled more warmly at his cousins, the quiet compliments she showered on the other women, never on me. The way his father barely acknowledged my presence at previous family gatherings, as though I were a shadow in their polished, perfect lives. I could see the little gestures again, the way my efforts to help with dinner were ignored, how my contributions to conversations were met with polite nods, but no real engagement. Every memory combined into a tapestry of rejection, and I felt the sting of injustice deep in my soul. I wondered why I had let their opinions matter so much, why their approval had weighed on me like a chain I hadn't even noticed. My hands fisted in my lap, and I could feel the heat of anger rising, simmering beneath the surface of my composed exterior. I reminded myself that this wasn't just about dinner. It was every small, cutting moment that had come before. All the favoritism, all the microaggressions, the unspoken hierarchy that kept me at the bottom. The unfairness of it all made my stomach churn, a cocktail of humiliation and rage that demanded attention. And yet, beneath the fury, there was a spark of something else, determination. If they thought I could be dismissed so easily, that I could be labeled and forgotten, they were gravely mistaken. I pictured myself standing tall, unafraid, unbroken, and I realized that their underestimation would be my advantage. The car felt too small for the whirlwind of thoughts inside my head, each one pushing me toward a silent, calculated plan of comeback. I didn't just want to prove them wrong. I wanted to reclaim every ounce of dignity they had tried to strip away, to remind them that I wasn't the person they thought I was. The fire inside me grew brighter with each replayed insult, each remembered slight, until leaving that dinner felt like the first step in a much larger journey. One that would see me rise, not quietly, but with the full force of justice they never saw coming. When I finally reached my apartment, I didn't even take off my coat. I paced the living room, trying to contain the whirlwind of anger and humiliation, and when my phone buzzed with his name, I hesitated before answering. I began, my voice tight. I don't know what to do. Tonight, it was unbearable. He listened in silence for a moment, and I could hear the tension in his breaths, the uncertainty that always lurked beneath his polite exterior. I know, he said finally, his tone careful, hesitant. I don't know how to fix it either. That admission, meant to comfort, only made the pit in my stomach deepen. I felt the sting of isolation again. You don't get it, I whispered, my hands shaking. He humiliated me in front of everyone. Street garbage, can you even imagine? There was a pause, and I could sense his discomfort, his internal tug-of-war between loyalty to his father and wanting to support me. I just don't want to cause problems, he said, almost pleading, and I felt my frustration boil over. Problems? I was humiliated. Do you think this is just some minor spat? My voice cracked despite my attempts to sound composed. He sighed, the sound heavy, and I could feel his tension radiating through the line. I don't want to take sides, but I see why you're upset. I do, he admitted. I could hear the sincerity, but it felt half-hearted, tethered to fear and obligation. My eyes welled with tears I refused to let fall, and I clenched my fists at my sides. The conversation ended with no resolution, only the shared understanding of the impossibility of tonight. Alone again, I felt the weight of being misunderstood, unsupported, and underestimated. And in that suffocating quiet, I realized that if I wanted justice, I couldn't wait for anyone else to hand it to me. I had to take matters into my own hands, with clarity, precision, and resolve that no one, not even him, could derail. After that night, I refused to let their judgment define me. I spent hours online, reading stories, advice columns, and forums about handling toxic families, reclaiming respect, and turning humiliation into leverage. Each piece of knowledge felt like a key, unlocking strategies I hadn't realized I could use. I started small, offering innovative ideas at work, volunteering for projects that put me in the spotlight, and subtly showcasing my skills without arrogance. The first time my boss publicly praised my initiative, a thrill ran through me, a quiet vindication that whispered I was capable of more than they ever imagined. Socially, I began attending gatherings I had previously avoided, speaking up in conversations, and making connections that widened my influence. I noticed subtle shifts in how people treated me, nods of acknowledgement, invitations to participate, eyes lingering with respect rather than dismissal. Each small victory built my confidence, a slow-burning fire transforming humiliation into determination. I imagined the faces at that dinner, the smirks, the sneers, softening as they realized I was no longer the girl they could dismiss. With every calculated step, I moved from passivity to strategy, understanding that patience and planning were my greatest weapons. I mapped out my social moves, career ambitions, and public appearances, ensuring each aligned with a narrative of growing strength. By the end of these weeks, I didn't just feel more powerful. I was more powerful, ready to reclaim the respect that had been denied to me. And in quiet moments, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile, knowing that when the time came, they wouldn't see me coming. They wouldn't even recognize the force I had become. The next time I attended a social gathering that included his family, I made a deliberate choice. I would no longer shrink into the shadows. I arrived confidently, dressed simply but impeccably, letting the air around me convey calm authority. His father glanced my way, a flicker of surprise crossing his face, and I felt a rush of satisfaction I refused to hide. As the evening progressed, I engaged in conversations with ease, offering witty insights and listening attentively, earning nods and laughter from people who had previously ignored me. At one point, his father tried to cut me off mid-discussion, a thinly veiled insult hidden as casual banter. "I'm sure someone like you wouldn't understand the nuances here," he said, smirking. I paused, allowing the silence to stretch just long enough for everyone to notice, then responded evenly. "Actually, I do, and I think my perspective adds value." The table went quiet, the weight of my calm confidence pressing against his attempt at dominance. Internally, my heart raced, but I maintained a composed exterior, savoring the subtle shock in his expression. Each small victory felt like a chess move, repositioning me in a game I hadn't realized I could play so well. His glance flicked toward me several times that evening, measuring, assessing, and I knew he was recalculating what he thought he knew. By the end of the night, I had earned respect without shouting, without grand gestures, just by being unwaveringly present and self-assured. That night, walking home, I reflected on the taste of quiet triumph. I realized this was only the beginning. Once I understood the power of subtlety, every encounter could be leveraged, every slight could be inverted, and the humiliation of that dinner would be a memory eclipsed by the force I was steadily becoming. I decided it was time to let my accomplishments speak for themselves, without a direct confrontation. Carefully, I began sharing subtle updates on social media, photos of projects I had led, accolades from work, invitations to exclusive events, all framed casually, as if by coincidence. Mutual friends who had always been peripheral witnesses to the family dynamics started mentioning my successes in conversation, almost as if the news had traveled faster than I expected. I could feel the tension building from a distance. I imagined his father scrolling past my posts, unaware of the quiet power shift taking place. Every like, comment, and message of admiration acted like a small victory, an invisible nudge reshaping perceptions. At family gatherings, casual mentions from acquaintances about my recent achievements drew curious glances, subtle raises of eyebrows, whispers that didn't reach me directly, but landed like tiny seeds of doubt in his mind. I noticed him becoming distracted, checking his phone more frequently, a shadow of unease creeping into his demeanor. I relished these small, silent reversals, the knowledge that I was quietly rewriting the narrative, that my underestimated potential was now visible to those who had once ignored me. Each strategic reveal strengthened my confidence and sharpened my focus. By controlling how and when my successes were known, I could escalate the status tension without ever appearing aggressive or confrontational. I had become a storm quietly building strength, and I knew the moment for the first real strike was approaching, one that would catch them completely off guard. A week later, an envelope arrived at my door, pristine and formal, with his father's unmistakable handwriting. Inside was an invitation to another family gathering, a dinner meant to celebrate some minor achievement of his son. I held it in my hands, feeling the familiar pang of anxiety, but this time it was mixed with something else: anticipation. Instead of shrinking away, I felt a surge of determination. I replayed the events of the last dinner in my mind, the sting of his insult, the smirks of his siblings, the helplessness I had once felt. But now I wasn't powerless. I could see every angle, every social nuance, every opportunity to turn the table. My mind raced through possibilities. Who would notice what? Who could be influenced? How every gesture, every word, every subtle display could shift perception in my favor. I imagined walking into the room with calm authority, letting them realize too late that I was no longer the person they could dismiss. My heart thrummed with a mixture of excitement and quiet fury, each beat reminding me that patience had been my ally. I considered the conversations I'd have, the strategic glances, the carefully timed reveals of my accomplishments. By the time I finished mapping it all out in my mind, the nervousness had transformed into a meticulous plan. I smiled almost smugly and whispered to myself I knew exactly what I was going to do. The anticipation was intoxicating, and for the first time, the thought of seeing him shocked, unsettled, and speechless brought a thrill I couldn't deny. The night of the event, I arrived with deliberate composure, every step measured, every smile carefully timed. I could feel the familiar tension in the room, the way people stiffened as I walked past, and I welcomed it. His father's eyes flicked toward me, and I saw a fleeting uncertainty there, quickly masked by his usual smirk, but I knew it was cracking. I had spent days planning this, mapping the room, anticipating conversations, and identifying moments when his ego would leave him exposed. The dinner began like any other: polite chatter, laughter, and clinking glasses, but I was alert to every detail, waiting for the right opportunity. Then it came, In the middle of a discussion about his recent business dealings, a casual remark slipped into conversation. He boasted about his unwavering ethics and how he never tolerated dishonesty. I nodded politely, feigning interest, then leaned slightly toward a mutual acquaintance and shared, in a soft voice that carried just enough, the story of a recent incident where he had publicly contradicted his own words to save face. A ripple of shock moved through the group. Murmurs spread like wildfire. I watched his composure falter as glances darted his way, questions whispered, subtle skepticism replacing the unquestioned admiration he was used to. Every raised eyebrow, every pause in conversation, was a small victory, a crack forming in the facade he had maintained for years. He tried to regain control, attempting to laugh it off, but the effort was transparent, desperate, and entirely ineffective. I could feel the power shifting, not in loud declarations, but in the subtle acknowledgement from the people around him that his authority was no longer absolute. Inside, my pulse raced, but my expression remained calm, measured, confident. By the time dessert arrived, the air had changed. The room buzzed with quiet speculation, and I had positioned myself not as an intruder, but as a force to be reckoned with. He realized it then, too late. The woman he had mocked, dismissed, and insulted now commanded attention, subtly but undeniably holding the upper hand. Every whispered comment, every sidelong glance, reinforced what I already knew. I had taken control without shouting, without confrontation, with nothing more than strategy, presence, and timing. The humiliation he had once inflicted on me was now reflected back with interest and satisfaction, and I could almost hear the silent acknowledgement of my triumph echoing through the room. I had orchestrated the perfect reversal, and as I sat back letting the tension settle, I felt a wave of satisfaction that was almost intoxicating. A week later, I knew it was time to escalate, to show, not tell, how far I had come. The invitation came for a casual brunch at a high-end country club, and I arrived with a quiet confidence, stepping out of a sleek car that I had worked hard to afford, a small but unmistakable symbol of my progress. His father's eyes widened as he noticed the subtle signals of success, the tailored attire, the luxury he could never casually acquire, the ease with which I moved through the space. I smiled politely at his siblings, who were equally shocked, and felt the thrill of watching their perception shift in real time. Inside, I navigated the brunch with poise, sharing stories of recent accomplishments, charitable projects, and professional achievements, all framed casually, as if these were everyday occurrences, not statements of power. His father attempted to interject, trying to regain the upper hand, but each word I spoke carried quiet authority, each anecdote subtly undermining his assumptions. I could see the flickers of doubt, the hesitation, the realization that I was no longer someone to be dismissed or insulted. It was more than wealth. It was the confidence, the competence, and the independence I exuded that truly unsettled him. I reveled in the subtle victory of arriving in a space he considered his domain, turning his judgment into a testament of my perseverance. By the end of the brunch, the family's whispered glances, the awkward compliments, and the palpable recalibration of social hierarchies were unmistakable. I had orchestrated a reversal that was visually striking, emotionally satisfying, and unmistakably mine. As I stepped away, leaving the murmurs behind, I felt a surge of empowerment. Every insult, every dismissal of the past, now served as fuel for this elegant, undeniable triumph. The realization hit me fully. I had not just earned respect. I had rewritten the rules of engagement, and he finally understood that the game had changed, with me firmly in control. The next family gathering was unavoidable. His father's pride wouldn't allow him to skip it, and neither would I. As soon as I arrived, I could feel the tension crackling, his gaze narrowing as if measuring just how much I had changed. He approached me, a forced smile plastered across his face. "So you think all this show of yours makes you better than us?" he asked, voice sharp, laced with condescension. I met his eyes steadily, allowing a calmness to wash over my words. "Better?" I said softly, letting the pause stretch just long enough for him to notice the room listening. "No, just capable of respect and integrity, things that seem to have been in short supply here." His jaw tightened, and he opened his mouth, clearly searching for a retort, but I continued, weaving every prior insult and misjudgment into a coherent narrative. You called me street garbage, I said evenly, but you failed to see who I am, what I've built, and the effort I've put into my life. Every dismissive glance, every whispered comment only pushed me to grow stronger. The room had gone quiet, the tension thick, and I could see people leaning in, absorbing my words. And yet, I continued, here I am, not seeking vengeance, but simply existing in a way that honors myself. I refuse to be diminished by the same judgments that once wounded me. He sputtered, trying to interrupt, but each attempt only reinforced the impact of my calm, precise statements. I allowed one final thought to hang in the air. I hope you understand now that underestimating someone never goes unnoticed, and the consequences aren't always obvious at first glance. By the end of the confrontation, the room's energy had shifted. The father's authority felt diminished, his composure fractured, and every subtle glance and murmur confirmed the moral victory I had achieved. I walked away, not triumphantly, but with measured satisfaction, knowing that I had dismantled not only his arguments, but the very foundation of his arrogance. The sense of vindication was quiet, yet profound, a reminder that control and respect are earned, never assumed, and tonight I had claimed both. In the days that followed, the shift in perception was undeniable. Friends, colleagues, and even distant relatives began treating me differently, listening when I spoke, seeking my opinion, offering congratulations for achievements they hadn't previously noticed. At the next family gathering, the change was palpable. His siblings exchanged subtle glances, no longer dismissive, and even his mother gave me a genuine smile, her admiration quiet but unmistakable. His father, though still stubborn, offered curt nods of acknowledgement, a small recognition of the power I now wielded without arrogance. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a release of the tension that had kept me rigid and wary for so long. Internally, I reflected on the journey, from humiliation at that dinner to the strategic victories that had restored my confidence. I recognized how much I had grown, not just in status, but in self-respect and emotional intelligence. I could navigate social dynamics, assert boundaries, and protect my dignity without resorting to anger or aggression. The empowerment I felt wasn't rooted in revenge anymore, but in the certainty that I could handle any challenge with grace and strategy. I allowed myself to savor the relief, the quiet joy of being seen and acknowledged for who I truly was. Every laugh, every casual compliment, every nod of respect reinforced the transformation that had taken months to cultivate. I realized that the true victory wasn't in humiliating anyone else. It was in reclaiming my own sense of worth, standing tall in the face of past injustice, and knowing that I could remain unshaken, confident, and empowered in every situation. Weeks passed, and life settled into a rhythm I had longed for, but never imagined I could achieve so completely. The tension that had followed every family gathering evaporated, replaced by a calm sense of control and peace. I moved through my days with confidence, no longer haunted by the sting of insults or the need for validation from those who had once dismissed me. When I thought of him, my boyfriend's father, I no longer felt anger, only a quiet acknowledgement of the lessons his arrogance had inadvertently taught me. He had been humbled, his assumptions dismantled, yet I didn't gloat. I let the universe and my own success speak on my behalf. I reflected on the journey, the humiliation, the planning, the subtle maneuvers, and the ultimate triumphs that had reshaped not just how others saw me, but how I saw myself. I realized that my strength wasn't simply in outsmarting him or reclaiming status. It was in the clarity, patience, and emotional resilience I had cultivated along the way. There was a bittersweet note in knowing that the person who once tried to belittle me had inadvertently fueled my transformation, shaping me into someone unshakable. I smiled softly, savoring the moral and emotional closure that had finally settled over my life, understanding that true victory lay not in revenge alone, but in embracing my own worth, rising above the cruelty, and stepping fully into the person I had always been capable of becoming. The past's shadow had faded, leaving only empowerment, peace, and the quiet satisfaction of lessons learned and justice, in its own subtle way, delivered. Months later, A surprising opportunity landed in my lap, one I had quietly positioned myself for over time. A prestigious community initiative, something my boyfriend's father had long coveted for recognition and influence, now required leadership, and through a combination of skill, timing, and strategy, I was the one chosen. When the announcement was made, I could see the faint twitch of disbelief in his expression, a flash of the old arrogance replaced by shock. The room buzzed with congratulations and admiration, directed entirely at me, and I felt a quiet thrill at witnessing the unspoken realization settle over him. He had underestimated me. I accepted the honor graciously, every word of acknowledgement carefully measured, letting the subtle social reversal speak louder than any boast. For the first time, the power dynamics had fully shifted. His past insults had no weight here, only highlighting the contrast between who he had expected me to be and the capable, respected woman I had become. As I smiled and offered thanks, I knew the lesson was clear. Underestimating someone never comes without consequence, and karma, in its own quiet yet undeniable way, had arrived. In that moment, satisfaction wasn't about humiliation or revenge. It was about being recognized for my worth, my competence, and my resilience. He remained speechless, the air charged with acknowledgement, and I finally allowed myself a full sense of closure, knowing that every step of my journey had led to this perfect, measured vindication.